Focus on Art. A personal visit with the artists, museum curators, and gallery directors of Northeastern Oklahoma. A presentation of the Rogers State College Art Department.
Welcome once again to Focus on Art. I'm your host, Barbara Cohen-Air, and delighted you're with us again this evening. When I teach art appreciation, I take my students on a tour of the downtown Tulsa buildings, and this has become a real favorite project with them. In fact, it's such a favorite that I even have requests from my friends occasionally, so I decided this evening that I would take you on a tour of the architecturally significant buildings that we see on the Tulsa skyline. I might begin by saying that Tulsa has numerous buildings that would be perfect examples for us to use on this program. And we only have 30 minutes, so we may be a little bit limited. And if I miss your favorite building, I'm sorry, we'll try and catch it on an upcoming show. As you look at the Tulsa skyline, obviously your eye is drawn first to the tallest buildings. And the tallest building that we see in downtown Tulsa is the 52-story Bank of Oklahoma Tower. It's located at 1 Williams Place. It's a clean rectangular skyscraper that's in what we call the international style. The international style was very popular here in America in the 60s and early 70s. The second tallest building that we see is also an international building, and that's the First National Bank building. Probably one that catches your eye, though, a little quicker because it's a little bit ornate, is the Mid-Continent Building, the home of Reading and Bates. It's the tall white building that has the weathered green, ornate, copper top on it. A fourth tall building that you see as you look over my shoulder is one that was the tallest building in Tulsa for about 30 years. It's the 320 South Boston. It's very ornate, and it's very interesting because it represents what early skyscrapers looked like in this country. Before architects knew exactly how to make a tall building look like whatever a tall building should look like, they had no previous examples. They went back to older styles of architecture, and in the case of this particular architect, he went back to the classical style and applied almost a surface decoration of traditional design motifs onto the building, and that's what we see on the 320 South Boston. Of course, that's also a building that's important to Tulsa because for a number of years it was the weather beacon in the sky. If you lived in Tulsa a number of years ago, you know if it was raining or snowing, you could go outside and find out for sure by looking at this tower because it was lit with colored lights that were there to kind of forecast the weather. In any case, I think we should start with the tall buildings since we see those first. In fact, I'd like to start at 1 Williams Place, and then we'll just kind of proceed as if on a walking tour and take a look at the other buildings that I think are at least interesting from the standpoint of their architecture and are significant as this beautiful city's developed through the years. So let's go to 1 Williams Place. The Bank of Oklahoma Tower is an example of an architectural style called the International. International because the initial group of architects developing the style included Mies van der Rohe of Belgium, the Frenchman Le Corbusier, and the German Walter Gropius. The international character of the style developed even further when Mies and Walter Gropius moved to the United States following Hitler's takeover of Germany in the 1930s. The tower represents the late international style at its best. It's a clean, rectangular, monumental building that becomes a powerful statement about the character of American business. The architect, Minoru Yamasaki, is a major contributor to the late international style and is best known for his designs of the World Trade Center in New York City. Critics have stated that perhaps the Tulsa design is really his best because the building relates so well to its setting and because of the building scale. I'm particularly impressed with his use of the monumental arches on the lower two floors. Not only do the curved lines soften the severity of the rectangular international style and add a feel of grandeur to this handsome building, They diminish the enormous feel of the building at the level of our approach and consequently relate to us on a more human scale. Tulsans will be able to live with the BOK Tower for many years without the buildings becoming painfully dated and painfully offensive as styles and taste change. The International is, by the way, a style of the past, a style that was abandoned by architects in the late 70s. To the north of the BOK Tower is one of the structures that relates strongly to Tulsa's history and one that holds for many Tulsans a touch of nostalgia and fond memories, Tulsa Union Depot. Union Station is classified, first of all, as an Art Deco structure. Art Deco is a loosely defined term that means a number of things to a number of people. Most simply, it refers to architecture of the 20s and 30s and encompasses a number of sub-styles that mutate one into another as architects move from traditional styling to the more modern. Government buildings constructed during the Depression of the 30s are responsible for changes in the Art Deco style. Standardization and the taste of the Public Works Administration, that is the PWA, and the Works Progress Administration, that is the WPA, account for these changes. The Tulsa Union Station is not a building built by either of these two agencies, but it is certainly a precursor of what will become the taste and the style of public buildings built by these agencies. The massive monumental quality of the building, its facade being streamlined in some areas while clinging to classical design motifs in others, and the inclusion of ornamental motifs taken from Central and North American Indians, leaves us with a building that might be more accurately described as WPA modern. Typical of his time, the architect R.C. Stevens, chief architect for the Frisco Railroad, had no problem mixing a traditional design motif, the Greek fret, with a cartouche surrounding a very modern design motif, a flying railroad wheel. The station opened in May of 1931 and was here for the heyday of rail travel. As many as 36 passenger trains a day passed through the station. After World War II, rail travel declined and the station closed its doors in 1967. For over a decade, the building sat vacant, becoming home for vagrants, wild dogs, and city rats. The beautiful interior was removed, stolen, and vandalized. The years of neglect left nothing but a shell. In 1983, the building came back to life when Urban Design Group transformed the crumbling structure into a lovely modern office building. Minus the original interior, the designers created a new one that is a fine blend of Art Deco and contemporary styling. Leaving Union Station, if we head south on Cincinnati to 3rd, then go west one block to Boston, we will be at the 320 South Boston building. This building is a little early to be classified as Deco, but is an excellent example of the predicament in which many early skyscraper designers found themselves. Since there was no history of tall buildings and no one knew for sure what a skyscraper should actually look like, lots of experimentation was going on. The architect of this building decided to use the old tried and true classical style as the basis for its design motifs. Pilasters, Greek frets, the cartouche, and on top of the building, small classical temple fronts are added like frosting on a cake. Perhaps this all seems a bit naive to our 90s sophistication, but the building is actually a statement about the searching for direction that was prevalent in architecture in the early 1920s. The building was actually built in 3 stages. The 12 stories on the north were opened in 1917, the 12 stories on the south were opened in 1923, and the tower was added in 1927. The addition of the tower made the 320 South Boston Tulsa's tallest building, and it held that position as being our tallest skyscraper for at least 30 years. Across Boston and on the corner of 4th is the Kennedy Building, another building that was constructed in two parts, in 1915 and in 1919. The traditional classical design motifs, the beautiful elevator doors that are brass, and the marble walls and floors are part of the original building. I'd like to talk for just a minute about the renovation that took place at the Kennedy Building. Traditionally, early skyscrapers were made in a form that would have long extending wings. In the case of the Kennedy, it was shaped like a U. A central hallway would run down through the structure, and then you have single offices on either side of that hallway. That way, every office had outdoor windows that could be open for ventilation, and then the doors into the hall would have a transom over the top of the door. Everybody would open their transom, open their windows in the summertime, and you would have air flowing through the building or have good ventilation. When we went to redo the Kennedy, they changed this traditional plan a little bit. Here we still have the U-shaped structure, but what they did was they moved the hall from a center hall out here to the edge of the U. Then they closed off what would be the top part of the U with a solid wall and put a translucent roofing material over the very top of the building. So what you end up with then is a building that has a 10-story atrium. And of course, an atrium or an enclosed interior space is very much a part of contemporary architecture. So just really by moving this hallway, opening this interior wall up so that we really have kind of balcony hallways, and placing the material across the end to close it off, you have a wonderful 1980s, 1990s building on the interior while you maintain the beautiful traditional exterior that's very much a part of the Tulsa skyline. Continuing south to the block bound by 4th and 5th and Boston and Cincinnati, we find four buildings that are real architectural gems. On the corner of 4th and Cincinnati is the old City Hall. This building is a typical neoclassical structure and reminiscent of many government buildings in this country, everything from the White House to the state capitol. I suppose if I had to pick something that we would call our national style, I would have to pick the neoclassical. The building was designed in 1919 by the firm of Rush, Endicott, and Rush, a firm that made major contributions to the character of downtown Tulsa. The building is typical of the neoclassical style. It has engaged Ionic columns resting on a high podium and impressive front stairs. These three architectural features are Roman contributions to a style that is a combination of Greek and Roman influence. The entablature above the engaged columns is textbook, as is the Greek fret decoration. The attic, that is the floor above the entablature, is the neoclassical designer's typical solution for adding height to buildings that are too broad to handle a pediment. Next to Old City Hall is the Mid-Continent Building, formerly known as the Cosden Building, and sometimes today known as the Reading and Bates Building. The Mid-Continent was Tulsa's first skyscraper, built in 1917-1918 by Tulsa oil man Josh Cosden. The Gothic design motifs are again typical of that period when architects were searching for new looks among old ideas. It has typical Gothic design motifs, pointed arches, cusp designs, foliage, and crockets. These designs the architect brought from the past into the 20th century. When we look at the renovation on the Mid-Continent Building, I think we have another extremely interesting and innovative solution to bringing a building up to date. The Reading and Bates Company did not particularly want to move from their downtown Tulsa location, but they had a small 16-story building that simply wouldn't house the offices that they had. They found an early drawing by the architect where he had initially planned for the building to have a tall tower on it. So they thought if they could figure out a way to put that tower on, they could increase the size of the building to stay in their location. What we have drawn here in red basically indicates the original building. The architects designed another building that was an exact duplicate of the original building, and then they planned a tall tower to go on top of the structure. Now, the problem was that this original building wouldn't support any additional weight, so the architects came up with an ingenious method of putting all of the support in the building here in the new tower part, and then the side of the tower is cantilevered over. That simply means it's supported from the side over the top of the old building. In actuality, all of the tower is supported over on the new side. We could go in with a bulldozer, bulldoze down this old part of the building, and the tower would still stand. It'd give us a very unusual shaped building, but in fact, this is a freestanding, self-supporting structure that you see outlined in black here. Materials for this lovely building include everything from Georgian marble for the formal main lobby to Venetian Gothic terracotta veneer that was used on the exterior. I might mention that terracotta veneer is very popular with architects in the early part of this century, and that it's simply fire clay that's been molded into a design, usually a design created by the architect for a particular building, and then it has a glazed surface. The glazed surface can vary from a shiny primary color to a matte finish that duplicates stone. Just south of the Mid-Continent and facing Boston is the Atlas Life building. Again, Rush, Endicott, and Rush were the designers of this building. It was built in 1922 and is in the shape of a T for Tulsa, and also a T to provide good light and ventilation to all of the offices. As you look at the ledge near the roof line, you can see Atlas. He's been holding up the world high over Tulsa streets now for 68 years. The Phil Tower is located on the corner of Boston and 5th. Edward Delk, a Kansas City architect, designed the building, which was completed in 1927. The building is really transitional. The architect clings to the traditional Gothic design motifs in his use of cusp designs, Tudor arches, foliage, gargoyles, and in the fan vaulting of the main lobby. However, the crisp division between wall and ornamentation and the overall feel of the building point to the newer Art Deco style. The owner of the building was oilman Waite Phillips, and there is a sumptuous use of materials that reflect the wealth amassed here during the oil boom days. The fan vaulted ceiling was carved in Italy and reportedly took 2 years to construct. The exuberant ceiling is complemented by walls and floors of travertine. Custom design is everywhere: chandeliers, stair rails, and handsome brass elevator doors bearing the WP monogram. The multicolored tile roof on the tower is a Tulsa landmark. Craftsmanship, superb design, great attention to detail, all of these things add up to opulence. And opulence starts with O, and in Tulsa, that rhymes with oil. One block west, we find the real heart of this lovely city. For 2 blocks, 5th is close to through traffic, and for 3 blocks, Main. This area has been renovated into a lovely downtown park area known as Main Mall. The crossroads of this park are here at Bartlett Square. A beautiful contemporary fountain fills the tree-studded area with the sounds of rushing water. This is a spot where Tulsans come to relax during the busy workday, to eat, to people watch, or for the entertainment that's almost always here. Some days it's painters, some days it's a chili cook-off, some days it's a mime juggling for tips. But whatever, it's Bartlett Square, and Tulsans love it. 4 lovely buildings grace the square. The 1919 building with the monogram S was the original home of the Sinclair Oil Company. Oilman Robert McFarland built the building on the northeast corner of the square in 1918. Classical designs such as egg and dark, Greek fret, bead and reel, and the cartouche with festoons are very typical. In addition to these classical design motifs, we also find some very charming lions. The Mayo family, best known in Tulsa for their hotel interests, built the building on the northwest corner. In my opinion, the new building on the block steals the show. Or maybe I should say steals the show by not stealing the show at all. The sensitivity for the setting and space shown by the designers of the State Federal Building is extremely commendable. The feeling of defining and yet opening up the square is wonderful, as is the echoing of the waterfall shape in the overall design of the building. Furthermore, the whole thing is done with restraint and without the obtrusiveness so commonly found in architecture of today. If I may be allowed to give them one more accolade, the building is contemporary in feel and yet fits so comfortably with the surrounding beautiful traditional Tulsa architecture. Or we might say a comfortable new building, modern in feel, but one that doesn't have to scream, "Hey, I'm the new kid on the block." Continuing west on 5th, we come to the Pinyon Building. With a name like that, I just couldn't pass it by. The building was built by Jim Gillette and Harry Terrell, again Tulsa oil men. Edward Sanders was the architect. He originally planned a tower that would be on the top of this building and house a 10-story hotel, but only the first 3 floors were completed. Back in 1930, when the building was opened, Western Union was one of the building's original tenants. The building is truly Art Deco in style. The multicolored terracotta, with its emphasis on the vertical, and the dancing zigzag motifs are absolutely textbook deco. As you look at these designs, I'm sure you'll think of Frank Lloyd Wright, because there's no doubt that Frank Lloyd Wright was very influential on the Art Deco style. West 1 block and North 1 block, we find the old Adams Hotel. The Adams certainly wins an award for having Tulsa's most ornate facade. Cream-colored terracotta is formed into a myriad of designs that cover the building like frosting on a wedding cake. The design motifs are a mixture of almost everything known to mankind. Some are Gothic, some are Moorish, some are classical, and a few other that I'm not sure that I can even identify. The building will probably never win accolades of architectural historians, but it does represent a time and a mindset that says more is better and ornateness expresses wealth best. Moving 1 block east to Boulder and 1 block north to 3rd, you find another example of the neoclassical style. The old Federal Building, now the home of the Corps of Engineers, is typical of government buildings built across this country. Ornate Corinthian columns run the entire length of the block-long facade. Doorways patterned after Greek temples punctuate the long facade at either end. All parts of the classical order are here: podium, base of the column, capital, architrave, frieze, and cornice, just like in your art history textbook. Above the traditional entablature, we see the attic, the same solution used by the architect of the old City Hall that we looked at earlier. On the east side of Boulder, across the street from the Corps of Engineers, are a pair of buildings that represent the style that followed the late International. The thin-skinned or glass-clad Williams Towers are a fine example of American architecture created in the late 70s and early 80s. As a reaction against the severe rectangular simplicity of the International, architects began to experiment with more creative shapes. The unusual shape of these buildings can best be seen from the plaza just to their east. The dramatic black glass is an effective foil to the light stone of the BOK Tower. The last buildings I want to mention can be reached by walking from here, if you're in great shape, or at least be seen by walking east on Boston and looking south. At what appears to be the end of Boston is Tulsa's finest example of the Art Deco style, Boston Avenue Methodist Church. It's located at 13th and Boston and was begun in 1925. Ada Robinson, who was the supervisor of art at Tulsa Central High School, provided the ideas for the church and many of the design motifs. Architect Bruce Goff, who had been a former student of Miss Robinson's, provided the technical know-how to make the building a reality. Miss Robinson's initial plan for a semicircular auditorium, joined by a rectangular service and classroom wing, has changed little from its initial conception. The Deco stylized designs on the exterior reflect both the late 1920s Deco styling and the influence of architect Frank Lloyd Wright. The outside lanterns just seem to say, our designers knew Frank Lloyd Wright well. Circuit riders who carried the message of Methodism across early America gazed down on 20th century worshipers from high above the main doors. Note that they are quite stylized or modern in appearance. The roof-lined finials, which seem from a distance to be rather Gothic in feel, are in fact stylized praying hands. The 225-foot campanile is one of Tulsa's best-known landmarks. And finally, while we're south of the downtown area, we might head over to 11th and Boulder to see one of Tulsa's lovely Gothic Revival churches, the First Methodist Church. The bold stained glass window on the front with its Gothic arch and stone tracery. The lacy twin bell towers reminiscent of late Gothic towers. The battlements at the roofline. The buttressing. The column-lined splayed doorways. And even a gargoyle or two are all basically Gothic design motifs. The Gothic was popular in Western Europe during the 12th through the 15th century. The Gothic style was actually a very popular revival style in America during the last part of the 19th and early part of the 20th century. Well, we seem to be out of time, but we're certainly not out of buildings. I do hope you've enjoyed seeing at least a sampling of the important structures in this beautiful American city. Until next time, this is your host, Barbara Cohen, wishing you a most pleasant good evening.